Welcome, creative adventurers. I'm Debbie Cohn with Cone Designs. Thank you for stopping by today. In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make the Missouri Star block. It's an iconic and traditional block. This is week 6 in our A Walk in the Stars Quilt Along. This is the last block in the quilt. Next week, please stay tuned because I'll have the finishing. I'll show you how to put all the blocks together in my special zigzag design and then show you the reveal. Both the one at the quilter right now with the light background and this dark background. It's cheery and fun and festive for the holidays. Behind me, you can see all of the other blocks for the Quilt Along. Up here in the corner, you'll see the friendship stars, and down in the corner down here is the star flower. Those are the first 2 blocks we did in week 2 of the Quilt Along. The next block we did was the Ohio star, right up here above my head. There we go. Then over here we have the reverse sawtooth star, which we did last week. Now this week's block is a tiny bit more challenging, but not too much, and I'm going to walk you through it every step of the way. And it puts together all of the techniques that we've been learning throughout this Quilt Along. I know you can do it, and I'll walk you through it every step of the way. First, let's talk about the anatomy of this Missouri Star block. How is it put together? It looks complicated, but it's actually fairly simple. First, starting from the center out, you'll have a square in the square unit. You'll have your fabric C center, and then your fabric D triangles that go around the center to form a square in a square block for the center section. Along the top, the bottom, and each of the sides, you'll have flying geese units. This may look familiar to you. The only wrinkle is that the sky section of the flying geese units is split into 2 different colors. You have the darker navy and white stars, and then you have the contrasting red and gray plaid. In these flying geese units, the geese themselves, the fabric E, is the white on white. It forms the background for the Missouri Star block. And then, of course, in the 4 corners, you have your background white on white fabric, which is your fabric A squares. Here are the pieces you'll need for the block. Your fabric A, you'll need your 4 fabric A squares for the outside corners. Your fabric B helps to form your flying geese. This is the geese portion. And then fabric C and D will be the star points of the Missouri Star. Fabric E forms the frame, or the square in the square section of the fabric F fussy cut centers. For the Missouri Star block, we're going to start working from the center out. So we're going to form the center unit, which is the square in the square block. We have our fabric F, our fussy cut square. In my case, some cute little snowmen. Then we're going to take our fabric E squares, cut them both diagonally in half 1 time, like this, and then you're going to sew them to each side of the fussy cut square. First, we're going to turn it over and mark a diagonal line on the back of each of the squares. Here you can see I've drawn my diagonal line across the back of each of the squares, and now I'm going to cut them. I've drawn my line fairly dark so you can see it on camera. You'll just want to make yours just as light as you need to be able to see it easily. The next step is to sew them right sides together to our center square. You'll want to position your triangular section so that is equal amount hangs over on each side. So center the triangular part. I'll do the same thing on the other side. And it's important that you don't do it adjacent. It needs to be across from, or this will not work. You can sew 2 at a time. I've got them both lined up. I'm going to pin and take it to the machine to sew a 1/4 inch seam to join the triangle to the square there and the other triangle to the square there. You can see I have pinned the triangles to the center square. Why do I do that? Well, for 2 reasons. One is that these triangle pieces are bias edges along there and along there. It will help to keep from distorting the triangles while you work with them. And the other is to keep the triangles from shifting when you sew the 2 pieces together. So I do recommend pinning in this instance. Here you can see that I've sewn 2 fabric D triangles to the opposite sides of the fabric F center square. Let me show you the seams so far. You can see that I pressed the seams open. It will help the unit be flat when I add the other triangles on as well. Now it's time to add the other 2. I'm going to do the same thing, right sides together, making sure I have about an equal amount on each side of the square. I'll pin Sew a 1/4 inch seam again along each side, and then it will be time to press the seams open again and then trim our unit. One quick tip here. As you can see, you have these little dog ears, these little extra pieces of fabric once you've sewn on the other set of triangles. I would go ahead and trim those off so that it is even, and then when you press these seams open, there won't be that extra bulk in these intersections. So here's our center unit. Let me flip it over and show you the back. You can see that I've pressed my seams open to help reduce the bulk in the center. The last thing to do before moving on to the flying geese units is to trim the center unit down to 6.5 inches square. That's very important that you do this before moving on. Now we're moving on to the flying geese units. Here are the fabrics that we'll need. We'll need the one large B square, 2 C squares, and 2 D squares. First thing you'll want to do is set aside the B square and mark the backs of the lighter of the 2 squares, whether that's C or D. In my case, I marked the backs of the C squares. You're going to draw a diagonal line from corner to corner on the backs of both of them like I've done here. Then you're going to pair them up to make the half square triangles. Just like you did when we made the flying geese units for the reverse sawtooth star, you'll want to stitch a very scant 1/4 inch away from the drawn diagonal line on each side of the line. You'll also want to pin just to hold the squares in place so they don't shift while you're stitching. I'll pin and sew and bring it back to you. All right, here I have sewn a scant 1/4 inch on each side of the diagonal line, as you can see in both of these sets of half square triangles. The next thing to do is to cut along the diagonal line, open it up, and then you're going to press your seam toward the darker of the 2 fabrics. I'll do that now and show you what I mean. Now you can see I have opened my half square triangles and I've pressed them to the dark side. Let me show you on the back. I've pressed the seam to the dark side. You do not trim them. Don't trim them at this point. The next thing you're going to do is you'll need your mechanical pencil, your ruler, and your large square, and you're going to lay your half square triangles face down with the dark portion of the HST toward the outside of the square, like this. Lay it down. You're going to draw a diagonal line across both HSTs from corner to corner like this. I'm using a mechanical pencil and drawing it a little darker so you can see it on camera. A couple things to note: make sure that your half square triangles are overlapping in the middle like this. That's perfectly fine. That's what you want. And that when you go to pin, you're going to pin outside of the stitch line, because the next step is to go ahead and stitch on both sides of the drawn line a scant 1/4 inch. I'll go ahead and stitch that and bring it back to you. Here you can see I've sewn a scant 1/4 inch on each side of the diagonal line. The next thing is to cut that apart. This is the scary part. It doesn't look like it's going to turn into flying geese, but I promise you it will. The next thing you'll want to do is to turn your 2 sections now. You want to press it back like this, gently with your fingers. Then you're going to iron it back so that the seam goes toward the dark side. You'll do that for both sections of this. I'll do that and then I'll come back and show you the next step. Here you can see I've pressed the 2 half square triangle units back so the seam goes toward the darker, smaller triangles on both sides. Take one of the double half square triangle units. You're going to lay the 3rd half square triangle down in the corner with the darker section right in the corner like that. Then you're going to mark a diagonal line from the corner here down to the bottom corner like this. Hopefully you can see that on camera. The line is here. Again, I'm going to repeat the same process. I'm going to stitch a scant 1/4 inch seam along both sides of the diagonal line. Then you'll repeat the same thing for the other double half square triangle unit. Draw your line, stitch on both sides. I'll do that with both parts, with both units, and I'll bring it back to you. Oops, I almost forgot to remind you to go ahead and pin outside of your stitch line on both sides of the line. That will hold the half square triangle steady as you sew. Here you can see I have stitched a scant 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the diagonal line for both of the units. I'm going to cut them apart right on the drawn line, and I'll show you what the next step is. I've cut them apart. I'll take out the pins. I'll take 2, and here's where it turns into flying geese. It's magic. Press this other flap back, and there you have it, a flying geese. These become the star points for the star, and this is the background goose. Let me show you again on the others. I just cut it in half here. All I do is flip this back. I'm going to gently finger press so you can see, and there's another one. I'm going to gently press these star points back with the seam going toward the smaller triangles. I'll do this on all 4 units, and then I'll show you the completed flying geese. Here we are. I have pressed back our flying geese units, and I have all 4 of them here. The next thing we're going to do is to trim the flying geese units to size. These are our star points, and I want to give you a tip about how to do this. So when you're trimming your flying geese unit to size, you're going to want to trim from this side first. Be sure you leave a 1/4 inch right here so you don't cut off the point of your geese. Let me flip this around and show you what I mean. I take my ruler, and I can see on here there's the 1/4 inch line, so I'm going to make sure that it is a 1/4 inch away all the way across, especially right here at the point, and then I will trim. Once I do that, I'm going to flip it around to this side, and then I measure in the appropriate distance, which is 3.5 inches, and I can use my mat again, measure over, and then I trim from this side. That way any excess is trimmed here and not cutting off the point. After you've trimmed your flying geese so that it's 3.5 inches wide, you're going to trim the length down to 6.5 inches. So to do that, I center my flying geese on my mat, and right now it's sitting at 7 inches. I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch from each side to bring the flying geese unit to the correct size. There, I've trimmed 1 flying geese unit. I'll trim the other 3 flying geese units, and then I'll show you how to put the block all together. Now that we've finished our flying geese units, let's put the block all together. It's easy, like this. First, we'll put our flying geese units in like this. Make sure that your points are closest to the center unit with your geese pointing in, like that. All 4 of them. And then just add your background squares in the corners. So here's the Missouri star. All we need to do is sew it all together. I'm going to sew it in columns, but you could sew it in rows. I'll sew these 2 together, these 2, and these 2, pinning as I go, and then I'll add each unit on the end to complete the block. I'll sew it and I'll bring it right back to you. Here I've sewn my rows together right there. The next thing is to press the seams. When I'm pressing, I'm going to press the upper row. Both seams will be pressed outward. The middle row, the seams will be pressed inward toward the center of the block, and then the bottom row again will be pressed outward toward the outside of the block. Let me show you what I mean. This one, the seams are pressed to the outside. The middle row, the seams are pressed to the inside, like this, right here, going in. And the bottom row, the seams are pressed to the outside. And if you have one that's wayward, just press that down with the hot iron, which I'll do in a moment. The next thing we're going to do is to attach the rows to the center section and press the seams open for the final 2 seams, and then our block will be done. And here it is, our Missouri star block. The only thing I haven't done is trimmed it up to size, but I'll do that at the end when I've finished all the blocks. So let me show you the back side really quick. You'll see that I have pressed the 2 final seams open. That helps to relieve the bulk in the 4 intersections, and it helps the whole block to lie flat. Stay tuned for next week when we'll go over the finishing, how to insert all of our stars into our background fabric, and for the final reveal of this quilt. I'm so excited. I hope you're sewing along and having a great time. Please let me know in the comments if this is your first time sewing the Missouri Star block. And that's it for week number 6 of our Quilt Along. Don't forget to stay tuned next week for the finishing instructions and for the final reveal of both quilts. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up, tell a friend, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. That's the best way to support my channel. The links to the videos for all the previous weeks of the Quilt Along will be in the video description. There will also be a link to my blog at dconedesigns.com. There you'll find this week's pattern for the Missouri Star, as well as all of the other block patterns. Don't forget, be sure to download all the block patterns, the instructions, and the finishing details next week by November 30th, 2023. After that, I will be taking them down off my website, putting together and adding some sizes for a pattern for sale. But they're free until then, so just be sure you download everything right away. I'll see you next week for the finishing instructions and the final reveal. Thank you for watching.